Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, and welcome to the Karey Carbaugh podcast, episode 21. No matter how many times I do this, there's always a few glitches at the beginning. I do apologize. And for my Spanish-speaking friends, I don't want to forget to welcome you all in. Bienvenido al Karey Carbaugh podcast número 21. Y buenas tardes, buenas noches, damas y caballeros, chicos y chicas, niños de todas edades. So welcome, everybody. I do apologize again for being a day later than what I had reset as my day. I was going to do these on Wednesdays. I had a memorial service for my uncle yesterday, and I'll be sharing some thoughts that came out of that. But by the time I got home, it was a little bit later than this, for sure, and even a little bit later than my normal 8 o'clock Mountain Time podcasting. And so I thought, especially for my friends on the East Coast, it was a little bit late to do a podcast. So I appreciate you bearing with me. I hope some of you will catch this live. And if you don't, then I hope you'll catch it on the replay. And let me know whether you're watching this live or on the replay by dropping an L for live, or the word live, or an R, or the word replay in the comments, and let me know. And I often forget to mention this, but if you're enjoying these, click the like button. As one of the people that I watch online says, like if you do, and comment. So please do like these videos if you are getting value from them, and let me know by dropping the word value in the comments. Tonight's podcast, as many of my ones recently have been, was inspired by one of my iconic podcasting friends. So I will give a shout out to Tennille Stewart, who is another live podcaster. And tonight's topic came out of some comments that she made on her podcast earlier this week. And then I believe some of the comments also came from another amazing individual that I was able to perform with at Carnegie that Tennille had on her podcast earlier this week. It's interesting how God weaves our lives together, and those two knew each other, though not in person, and I got to meet Chanel Gabriel is the other one I'll give a shout out to. I got to meet her in person before Tennille did. But the two of them were on this podcast on Monday, and one of the ideas that they shared, somewhat in passing on their podcast, but I pulled it out and said, this would be something to delve into a little more. And that's this idea of change. None of us likes change. I shouldn't say none of us. Most of us don't like change. Most of us like things status quo and comfortable. We know how things are going to be. But what is change? Many times change is actually growth. Change is growth in an area that maybe we need to grow in. And Tennille gave this example, which I'd never really thought of before. What if we had stopped growing in kindergarten? And here we are in our 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, or beyond, but we still look like a kindergartner. We're still, about 3 feet tall and have a cute kindergarten face and talk like a kindergartner. Our speech hasn't developed much past kindergarten. How would that be as an adult? That wouldn't be real effective. And if all of us were like that, certainly society would be rather interesting. And so change has been a part of all of our lives, really from the beginning. I mean, even prior to kindergarten, we changed to get to that point from when we were a newborn baby. and even before that, if you really want to get technical about it. Change starts from the very, very beginning of our earthly existence, and it continues clear up until our last breath of earthly existence. Some change is positive. Hopefully, most of that change is positive. Some of that change might be negative. I know some of my friends that I'm in contact with who have low vision, like myself, have not always had low vision. Their vision has changed over time. I'm very fortunate in that my vision is stable. There's still some minor changes that the doctors always notice when I go in for a checkup, but for the most part, my vision has stayed very stable. And going back to Tennille, her podcasting group is for chronically ill patients, and so certainly their lives are full of change. Some of it not positive. And while I don't want to minimize the negative change, I don't want to discount that. That's not going to be my focus tonight. And I think it's important for our self-esteem to try to look at the positives, even from within some changes that may be happening that are not so positive. I know I've had changes in my life that have not always been positive. Oftentimes, when I'm through those changes, I can look back on them and I can see the growth, and I can see the, if you will, the reason for the change. That doesn't necessarily mean I liked it at the time, but we can always look back on that change, that growth, and hopefully, in most cases, see the reason behind it, or the reason for the season, if you will. Again, not making light of people who are chronically ill, or people who are aging, and some of that aging change isn't always positive. It's declining toward the inevitable that we all face at some point. I don't want to minimize that, but that aside, if we can look at the change in our life from a growth and a, if not positive, viewpoint, at least be able to look at it from an education or a growth perspective. And I mentioned I was going to share a bit from my uncle's memorial service yesterday, his celebration of life. This also played into my thoughts about tonight. And I love how, for my belief system, God weaves things together once I get an idea and start developing my thoughts for this podcast, or it often happens in many other spheres too. But in particular, as I started developing the idea for this podcast, and then at my uncle's celebration of life yesterday, he was an agricultural person. He was a farmer growing up, and then worked in agriculture policies and legislation with legislators and so forth. But he was involved in planting and gardening pretty much his whole life, pretty much really right up until he took his last breath. And I'm sure if he were asked, he would acknowledge that in all of those little plants that he planted, there was growth from the moment he put the seed in the ground until the time that he had to cut the corn stalks down after the corn had sprouted and gone back to seed at the end of the season. And there were probably times that he had to prune back some of the branches on some of the trees or some of the plants that he was tending to. And that pruning is much like some of the negative things that we go through in our life. Something gets cut off. Something maybe we've dreamed of our whole life. A door gets slammed. It's not pleasant at the time. And if you look at plants or trees, when you cut that branch off, there's sap that comes out of it. And that sap, or in the case of some plants, it would be another type of fluid that flows out to block or clog that wound from the trimmed branch. It's much like what we go through. And if plants had pain sensation, they would probably feel pain from some of that pruning. But yet, in the end, it helps them to grow stronger. It helps them to be more resistant of weather and a whole bunch of other things. Very much like what we go through in our lives. As we go through those difficult storms, it helps us to weather the storms in the future. A young child who has not gone through many difficult things in their life, every little thing that goes wrong becomes a huge trauma, because to them, that is the most traumatic thing that they have experienced. Whereas as we become older, we've experienced more trauma and can learn from it and use that experience to help us weather the storms and deal with what life throws at us. And as I say, that pretty much goes until our final breath. I remember my dad used to have an expression, and we used to laugh at him, that he used to say, getting old is not for wimps. And of course, when we were all younger, we just kind of laughed at that, saying, oh yeah, whatever, Dad. Funny, ha ha. But my siblings and I have recently remarked that as we get older, it's not as funny anymore. Because now we're experiencing those pains of growth, if you will, or life declining, still a part of life. Maybe not as positive a part of life, but it's still a part of life, and we're still living. But when that pain stops and life quits changing entirely, that's when we know we're at the end. So if we can keep that in perspective, again, not making light of negative changes, and I'm sharing this to you all as much for myself as anyone, because I'm not necessarily a champion for change. But as I listened to my friend Tennille, and I'll get her on one of these podcasts here soon to share some of her story, she's certainly gone through change. Not all of it pleasant or positive. But what an amazing person she's become through that change and through that growth, and a beacon of light to other people. And so that's what I think we are all called to through the change that we experience throughout our lives. And so with that, that is basically the message I had for you tonight. If you got value from this, let me know by dropping the word value or a V in the comments. And again, if you liked this podcast, let me know. Like if you do. Comment below. And if you'd like to be added to my email list that I'm developing to start inviting you to some private events, drop the word email in the comments or shoot me a private message on Facebook or Instagram primarily. and let me know your email address. If you put the word email, I'll reach out to you privately and get your email address, so you don't have to share that publicly. But I'd love to start building an email list and love to add you to the group. So as I bring this in for a landing tonight, I do hope you got value from this. If you have questions, if you have suggestions for future podcasts, I'm always open. If there's things you'd like me to talk about that I've maybe touched upon, or maybe some things I haven't touched upon at all that you'd like me to touch upon, do let me know, because I'm always open to suggestions. So with that, I will let you go. I think I've taken enough of your evening up tonight, and we'll be going back to our normal time on Wednesday nights next week, Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Mountain Time. So I hope you enjoyed this. Have a blessed evening and do something positive for someone around you. Make a great day and a great week for someone else. So with that, goodbye for now, and have a blessed evening or blessed day whenever you're watching this. Thanks for tuning in. Bye for now.